right? Now, I'm glad there's a bunch of people following us now because of Wes, and I'm glad that people are following his content. But my
Absolutely.
prayer, listen, as you're listening to this, my prayer is that you are excited about Jesus.
Yes.
That ultimately, Apologetics Canada is pointing you to Jesus. That we are pointing you to Jesus. That Wes is pointing you to Jesus. Jesus is the point. We're not the point. And if you make the mistake of making us the point, then you're just setting yourself up for disappointment because we aren't Jesus.
Yeah.
We will let you down.
Yeah.
At some point or other, we will let you down.
It's the AC Podcast. For the love of God, love people.
Hey, listeners, welcome to the AC Podcast. I'm here today with Andy and Steve. Gentlemen, it is always a pleasure. Good to see you again.
Hey, man, good to see you.
Yeah.
Guys, I woke up to a pleasant surprise this morning. I got a text from somebody that was from their school, and it was a classroom full of students, and they were all reading my book, man.
Oh, wow.
Reclaimed.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Nice.
So
Nice.
shout out to that school.
That's
It's
awesome.
very cool, man.
That's
cool.
really cool. What does that
Yeah.
feel like? Writing a whole book and then actually seeing people take it in, because it's I do music, but a book is like a lot more words. Think.
Well, it's a lot of work, right? So you're like, oh, at least somebody's reading it. That's always nice.
That's true. That's true.
I'm sure you appreciate it when you come across somebody listening to your music. But let me ask you, Troy. I don't have to listen to people read my work. Like I don't, or myself, right? But when you're, say, driving in a car and somebody's listening to your music, how do you feel about that? Walk me through that emotion.
I don't think it'll ever feel normal, and I don't think I want it to. There was a school we were actually in where we were doing some filming for some promo stuff we were doing, and some kids recognized me, and then they didn't come up to me right away. They just started playing my music while we were setting up stuff, and I was like, this is cool. I'm like, I think that's him. And so it's honestly, it's an honor, but I don't think I'll ever not feel weird. It makes me feel super shy all of a sudden. I don't know why, but
Well, we got to give a quick shout out, and Max, you got to do something on screen here. But Troy's an amazing singer, rapper, artist. Goes by Scribe Music. I think that's right. Yeah, Troy?
yep, that's right.
Yeah, go to Spotify, iTunes, wherever you listen to music. Check it out. I love his music. My boys love your music, man. And
So do my kids.
yeah, go
Uncle
check it out.
Troy.
Yes, uncle status. That's what I live for. Appreciate that, guys. Appreciate that. Let's get into this conversation today. It's this actual conversation or topic idea, I guess, was given to us by a dear friend of the ministry, Lindsay Martin. She has worked with us at an event called the Leadership Summit that we have done several times, and she has been very instrumental in us pulling it off. And she brought this topic today.
Before you get into that topic, though, we should probably give a shout out to Wes. Wes is actually currently in California.
Yes, he is.
Recording a bunch of stuff. But beyond that, we run a leadership summit in British Columbia, and we have a leadership summit in Ontario.
Yep.
Wes leads the leadership summit in Ontario. We have one coming up in May. Go on to apologeticscanada.com and you can check that out and register. As you can imagine, spots are going to be limited,
Yep.
but great opportunity. So it's kind of interesting, Troy, that we promote leadership. We even have a leadership summit, but today we're going to be talking about leadership. And I think you would agree in some ways we're even asking, should you even have a leadership summit?
Yeah. So this topic was challenging this idea of the cult of leadership and culture's obsession with leaders and you being an alpha and whatever, really dunking on what seems to be any idea of you ever being a follower, being a part of quote unquote the status quo, just the average person. And so because we have a leadership summit, and talking with Lindsay, I was like, this would be a really good conversation because I think there's multiple perspectives, but I think probably the best thing would be to try and define how we see leadership before we go forward. So, Steve, how would you define leadership for yourself?
Oh, that's a big question.
Yeah.
I mean, a leader, if you just get down to the word of it, it's somebody who leads, right? And I think the difference, I think, often comes from, well, what does it look like to lead somebody else? I think that's probably where we'll spend a fair bit of time hashing out stuff. But I mean, a leader is just that, somebody who is leading. So I don't know what it's been like for you, Andy, but certainly when I was going to, middle school, high school, especially they amped this up in high school, there was a lot of push for leadership development, right?
Yes.
A lot of, but they always came with a certain kind of a picture.
Yes.
This is what a leader looks like. So I guess I'm just not sure about that. But as far as a leader simpliciter goes, I think somebody who leads, it's as simple as that.
Well, I funny enough, at the school that I went to a poor school in Oregon. Leadership development was not pushed at all.
No? Hey,
No,
okay.
it was like, please graduate, and if you could do so without having a child would be even better.
Oh my gosh.
So, like that was my high school experience.
For me, oh man, it was heavily pushed. I went to a large school in Saskatchewan, in Regina, and it was a big school. It was known for its athletics program. It was known for its music program. And I was always getting challenged personally as a leader growing up. And I mean, some of that I think comes from being a pastor's kid. There's already that pressure that I'm going to help set the standard because I'm the pastor's son. And then you take that into the school and, well, Troy, you're a Christian. And so you need to be part of the interschool Christian fellowship programs. You need to be leading people. And that was always something that I was definitely challenged with. And so leadership to me was quite literally, I'm setting the standard for quote unquote right living as a high schooler. And as you guys can attest, I have no idea what that really meant in high school. I just did what I thought it was. So,
and I find that a lot of the times when we think of leadership, especially in a high school context, a lot of it came down to a matter of popularity.
Exactly.
And personal charisma.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Somebody that a lot of kids like and want to follow. And you kind of have to wonder whether that is a true picture of leadership, or is this too incomplete to the point of being misleading?
That's a really good point.
Troy, when you brought this up, you said, "Hey guys, we got to talk on this subject of the cult of leadership."
Mm-hmm.
And I guess for me, and with regards to apologetics, I just hone in on cult, right? So I'm like, oh yeah, let's talk about that. We need to talk about this, this aspect of leadership with regards to those sort of charismatic leaders that are your, typical cult leader kind of characteristics.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think is interesting, though, that is actually tied into this, because what you actually wanted to get into was actually the cult of leadership itself, where we kind of have this national obsession. I'd actually say a global obsession
100%.
with this concept of leadership, and that you need to be a leader and what that looks like. But it's kind of interesting that these two, I think, are very intertwined, because we are currently living in a culture of influencing, right? It's
Yes.
an influencer culture where your charismatic individuals tend to kind of get propped up as the standard.
Yep.
Which is very interesting, where you've got everybody thinking, oh, I've got to be an influencer, I got to be that kind of leader. And now you've got all these different schools and opportunities and summits like we have, that you can go and learn more about being a leader. But I guess my concern is that people, when they're thinking about leadership, they're coming at it from a variety of different perspectives of what they think leadership is. But I would argue that by and large, culturally, people see it very much from that social media influencer paradigm.
So that's a good question then, right? What is the difference between a leader and an influencer? Is there an overlap? Where they don't overlap, well, what's the difference?
Woo! Well,
That's a whole can of worms that I opened right there.
Let me give you an example based off of kind of what Andy was saying in regards to social media influencers. There's a well-known YouTuber. His name is Aiden Ross, and I don't follow his stuff. I don't watch these guys on Twitch or anything of that nature. But there was a snippet I saw of him yesterday, and he is known for just saying some outlandish things, right? The new cultural leaders, quite honestly, are these streamers in a lot of ways. Got thousands of subscribers watching them do marathons where they're literally live streaming their entire life for weeks on end. And so this guy, Aiden, is known for saying some just crazy outlandish things, getting, celebrities angry at him and frustrated at him. And he has amassed a following that are just as toxic as he was. And just recently, it was like 2 days ago, he made a video. He's like, man, I hate it. I hate every one of you. I can't believe that I created you guys. He's like, he's like, but it's my fault. He's like, it's my fault. Like, I created you guys. And you guys are jerks. I want nothing to do with any of you. When I see your nasty stuff under my comments or whatever, I'm getting you banned. I'm getting you blocked. All this sort of stuff. And I sat there for a minute because naturally, some people are probably like, yeah, that's good. Look at him being remorseful. But I'm like, no, he doesn't want to take, that's not taking responsibility. Like, you started a wildfire and now you're blaming it's like you're blaming the wood for catching fire. Like, you started this.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of exactly what you're saying, Andy. He would be someone I'm calling an influencer. A leader is going to say, here's where I went wrong, and I'm going to walk this backwards, and I'm going to do the work of trying to actually better the people that I've led down this path. But that requires repentance.
So you would say then a leader from this perspective is someone that is an influencer, yes, but that is balanced with accountability.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's really interesting. That actually reminds me of this TV show that I watched. I mean, a lot of you probably know this, Suits, right? About these two lawyers, well, mainly these two lawyers, Harvey Specter. He's sort of the senior, he's the experienced guy, he's at the top of his game at this law firm. And then there's Mike Ross, who doesn't even have a law degree actually, but works for Harvey. But when they first start working, one of the things, I remember this scene very clearly where Harvey asks Mike to file out a patent so that he can close this deal that he's working on. Mike doesn't come through. And so then Harvey is chastising him. It's just what it means for the firm and that sort of a thing. So Mike says, so you told them that it was my fault? And Harvey says, well, of course not. I told you to do it. I'm in charge. So why would I tell them that? I told them it was my fault.
Yeah.
And I remember very clearly going, okay, that's good leadership. And intuitively, I saw that as, okay, that's what a good leader looks like. I mean, Harvey, for the most part, is a jerk, but at least in that moment, he showed good leadership because he showed accountability.
Yeah, I find that leadership, and as we kind of I want to show you guys something that as I was reading about where, man, this cult of leadership idea is not a new one. We actually see it in Scripture, and we're warned about it. We're warned about leadership. It just looks like in a different form. But one thing I'll say is there is definitely a difference between the type of person who leads in fair weather and a person who leads when it gets bad. And I've got to hear some stories of different business leaders during the pandemic and what they were willing to do for their staff and what they were willing to do to try and really understanding that these were tough circumstances. You watch some people just kind of get thrown to the wolves, and then you saw other people go above and beyond trying to not just set people up for the unknown as best they could, but actually lead them through it, like checking in on them. Hey, how are you doing? I know you're not able to work right now. I know things are tough, but how are you doing? And I think just as we're going forward, the way I define a leader is someone who they don't just lead you to, they lead you through. And it's not just a cool phrase, but really someone who's going to go to those tough places with you. But did you guys have anything you wanted to comment before I get into this passage of Scripture?
Man, what that really gets at, though, Troy, and I think it's just an important idea for people to appreciate, is that leadership is multi-leveled. It's complex, because I do have this concern as we talk about this topic that some people would think, oh, I'm not a leader, for example, and that it's kind of like this question, is everybody called to be a leader?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, I would say, well, yes and no. Yes and no. We are all called to leadership. You will all have a leadership call on your life, but it doesn't look the same. Each of us have a different leadership position in our lives. That you might have a leadership position over your children, over your family, over your business. Oh, it can, what I'm saying? It can look like different things. The question is, how are you going to lead in that moment? And so when you say, Troy, this, leader is somebody that helps lead you through, I get concerned because I think people always want to point their finger and go, oh man, they're not a good leader, or they didn't come through. But I'm always asking, yeah, but what about you?
Yeah.
What about in the leadership that God has placed you? What does it look like for you to lead people through?
Yeah.
Because in our culture, I know this is a complex issue. Is going to go in many different terms. I mean, in many different directions. But in a culture that is so obsessed with individualism, as our culture is, that is so consumed with ourselves, we don't necessarily want to get into those challenging moments in people's lives and help walk with them through, because we're asking, well, what does that do for me? I mean, it's just going to take my time. It's going to put me into an imposition. It's going to be uncomfortable or challenging for me. It might require sacrifice on my part. But it's like, well, yeah, but that, I mean, that's what it looks like to be in relationship with people. That's what it looks like to walk through the trials of life with one another.
Yeah.
And are we willing to do that in the different levels or different places that God has us to lead?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. Like as you were saying, Andy, you asked the question, is everyone supposed to be a leader? And so as I was preparing for this, I was reminded of when Saul becomes king and that whole scenario, right? You see the Israelites, they're like, we want a leader, essentially. We want a king like all the other nations have, right? And what does Samuel say to them? He's like, well, if you're, this is what the Lord says. This is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons and make them serve his chariots and horses. They will run in front of his chariots. And he outlines, essentially, this is what a leader is going to do. A man is going to do, right? You already have the sovereign Lord as your leader, and I speak on his behalf. But he's your leader. And they say, yeah, but Samuel, you're old. You can't take us there anymore. You can't. They're challenging, saying, you're not hearing correctly. We want a king, we want a king, we want a king. And culture is still saying, we want a king, we want a king, we want a king. And I think this is where that cult of leadership comes in, and we see it even back there, right? Because as you turn the page in this whole situation, you see that Saul really didn't want to be king. When the crowd comes together, and listeners, I encourage you to read this portion. The crowd comes together, you see Saul was hiding when he was supposed to be called forward. He is hiding, but it says that Saul actually stood taller than everybody. So a man of his physical stature was everything picturesque that they thought a leader was, and he didn't want to be a leader. And I feel like the Lord used Saul's desire not to be a leader to show them what the worst of what a leader could be. And we know how that story goes with Saul, right? His first instruction he doesn't follow through with. And this is why I'm saying, like, this idea of a cult of leadership it's not a new idea. We've always been crying out for a leader apart from who the Lord is in our lives. And this isn't saying that the Lord isn't going to put people in place, right? Andy is my boss, but he's also mentoring. He's also discipling us. Like, whether people acknowledge that or not, that's on them. But I see that, right? And that's an important thing to pay attention to. But at the same time, like Andy has said many times, you should only be following someone so far as they're leading you to Christ. So when that stops, if that stops, then me following Andy or listening to Andy, that could that could lead you into some pretty dangerous waters. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
I'm just curious to hear Andy's thoughts, because Andy, you are in a position of leadership for Apologetics Canada Ministries.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you hear leadership, I would assume that you can't help but think through it from what your position is currently. So how do you work through that? Like, what does leadership look like for you? And what's the pressure that is, or the responsibility that's put on your shoulders when you think about leadership?
Well, I kind of think about it from many different perspectives. The first is, I would say that we're all leaders. So there's nothing unique about me that's not unique about somebody else. The only thing, and by that again, what do I mean by we're all leaders? We will all have moments in our lives that we need to lead.
Yes.
Period. That's all I'm saying by that.
Yep.
The problem is when I talk about leadership, or we talk about leadership, everybody's got their idea of, oh, this is what a leader is. A leader is just somebody that's following. There are people following you. Mm-hmm. Where are you leading them? And in those moments that you're leading. And so when it comes to my life, for example, Steve, I'm just thinking to myself, am I being faithful with where God has placed me in this moment to lead in this, period of my life, in this situation? Am I being faithful to what God's asked me? And the same way that you need to ask that of what God has asked of you, and Troy needs to ask that, and Wes needs to ask that, right? We all have these moments in our lives where we've got to ask, okay, am I being faithful? And this is one of the things that I think is interesting about the difference between Saul and David, right? The Israelites want a king, and God's saying, well, you've got a king, it's me.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, we want a king like all the other nations. And God's like, okay, fine. I'll give you a king like the other nations. So God gives him Saul, who's really a king that looks like a king on the outside.
Exactly.
But falters. And then they're like, okay, well, clearly we need a different king. And God goes, okay, I'll do you one better. I'll find one that looks good on the inside.
Yeah.
Right. And so he finds David, but David falters.
Yep.
But here's the thing that I think is interesting about David, that makes David a man after God's own heart, even though David made mistakes, right? And that is that he had that accountability piece.
Yeah.
David was willing to repent.
Yeah.
He was willing to see his errors, see his mistakes, turn away or turn back to God.
Yeah.
And correct them. And that, it's interesting because that is an important aspect or distinction, I should say, between a cult leader and a good leader. Like a charismatic cult leader is someone that does not allow, like a textbook case of a cult leader, does not allow for criticism. There is no such thing as accountability when we're talking about a cult leader. Now, this is something that we have to really take to heart. So whatever area of leadership that I'm in right now, am I above criticism? Am I above rebuke or accountability? And am I unwilling to turn and to say, you know what, I didn't have that right. Like, how do I turn back to the Lord and follow the Lord in this? Yeah. So I know that was a long answer to a short question, but that's how I'm thinking about it. I don't see myself as different from other people, Steve. I just see myself in a different call of leadership in this period of my life.
Yeah. Hey, listeners, I hope you've been enjoying the podcast so far. Before we get back to it, I wanted to let you know about an amazing event that we got coming up really, really soon. The Apologetics Canada Conference. This year's title is called The Theology of Technology, and we'll be holding it March 7th and 8th at Northview Community Church in Abbotsford, BC, Canada. From eyeglasses to smartphones, technology is all around us. It always has been. In fact, it's difficult to imagine humanity without it. However, recent advancements, especially in artificial intelligence, otherwise known as AI, have connected us to technology in profound ways. With technology that can even mimic humanity, we as followers of Christ must consider what technology is and what role it ought to play in our increasingly digital lives. So join us March 7th and 8th for our next Apologetics Canada Conference as we explore a biblical theology of technology. We're going to have some exciting speakers such as Wesley Huff, Bruce Lawn from King's Dream Entertainment, and many, many more. So make sure you head to apologeticscanada.com/conference25-BC right there as soon as this episode is done and make sure you register. We can't wait to see you there in person or online. Now, let's get back to the episode. So one of the questions that was brought up is how much of what we think is a good leader comes down to a person's personality, a person's makeup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because that one, like we alluded to earlier, just that question brings to my mind all these cultural conceptions of what a leader is, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm again thinking back to my high school days. My high school experience was apparently a little bit different from Andy's, but they really pushed leadership, and there was always a certain picture: somebody who's outgoing, somebody who's popular, somebody who's maybe a little bit, shall we say, loud, right? Yep. Somebody who can take charge of a room and, personal charisma and everything. And so I am just not sure that that's always what a leader looks like. I know that, for example, what I hear, I'm not an expert in German political history or anything like that, but you might remember Angela Merkel, or Angela Merkel, however people pronounce her name. She was the kind of a leader, apparently, who was very quiet, but very methodical. And so that if there is a problem to resolve policy-wise, she would get into this mode where she's very quiet, she is in her zone, and everybody knows not to talk to her at that moment. But then she would come up with a solution of some sort that she can bring everybody on board with and move forward that way. Very different from the kind of very loud, out there, outgoing kind of a leader, right? And I'm not always sure that it's healthy to reduce leadership to what it's like on the outside.
Yeah, that's good.
I think over and over again, what Andy was bringing up as he was sharing about his experiences is that leadership is it's about more than just personality. It's a moral character. There's a moral quality to it, that willingness to take responsibility for the things that's happening around you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I equate it actually within our worship team. We have a variety of different worship leaders. And at any given moment, we could have 8 of us, nine people on our platform, but we'll have maybe 3 or 4 of us that are key to leading a particular moment, right? And us being a church that is in our worship, we can be free flowing. For example, we'll have our set list, but if in a moment I genuinely feel like the Lord is saying, "Hey, let's go sing this hymn in this moment," at the back end of a song, or I feel like we're gonna, I'm just feeling him honestly in my spirit that the Lord is like, "Hey, we're gonna sing another song." I have been entrusted as a leader to take our congregation into that moment. And one of the things we stress all the time is worship leading isn't an opportunity for just a vertical moment between you and the Lord. It is a horizontal opportunity. So I could be, because the Lord is always speaking, right? You guys have given sermons, you're preaching, and you have your notes, and there's moments where, man, something comes to mind, and you're like, "Ooh, should I say that?" And you're like, you got to, in like real time, you got to figure out whether or not you're going to go there or not. But I've learned that within our community, there are certain moments that require certain leaders to go that direction, right? I have a big voice. And so maybe if the room has come down a little bit and people are actually responding in just prayer in that moment, maybe it's not the time for Troy to go like, "I gotta pray." Like, maybe the door doesn't need to be kicked down, right? But it comes with wisdom in knowing what kind of leader you are for that moment. And I think that was something that we've been alluding to, and I think is important to consider, especially in these times, is you may not be the quote unquote carbon copy leader that people think a leader is. And this is what we stress at the BC Leadership Summit and at the Ontario Leadership Summit. Leadership doesn't require you to come in with a title. Leadership is acknowledging that you are uniquely and individually created by God with a purpose, first and foremost, to worship him. And that your life and how you lead your life is an opportunity for other people to then be led by you. But ultimately, it is follow me as I follow Christ, right? That's what Paul said.
Yeah, 1 Corinthians 11, verse 1.
Yeah.
It's an important theme, as you guys have already alluded to, that I've really grabbed hold of, is that I want to lead people to Jesus, because I've seen poor leadership so much in our culture where people want to lead others to themselves. They want to make it all about themselves, and so that's an interesting aspect where personality plays a part in this, because there's some people that are just incredibly narcissistic.
Yep.
Right? They want to lead people to themselves. I mean, that's one of the challenges with influencer culture, is it just feeds the narcissism, right? That we all have at some degree. So let's be honest, it's not like some have it and some don't.
Right.
No, just some have more than others have.
Right.
We all love at some level to be the center of attention, if you will. But and that's one of the challenges, by the way, with ministry. It's one of the challenges with leadership in the church, is that you literally are put on a platform.
Yep.
And when you're put on a platform like that, and especially you're in a culture of influencing, so we're like, okay, it's perfect. Like that's what people want. They want to be put on a platform so that they are the, center of attention at some level. I know I'm overstating this, but
No,
that is happening. So we have to appreciate that you've got to work through that. So what does it look like to lead people literally on a platform, but doing so in a way that's pointing people to Jesus, in a way that is done in accountability and in humility, so that we don't make it all about ourselves.
Yeah.
Because, this is one of the challenges that we find in the church quite often, is that people will make it all about themselves. And, there's a very good reason. I just want to speak into this for a moment here. There's a very good reason we didn't call Apologetics Canada, Andy Steiger Ministries International. I'm not into that. I'm just not into that. And it's also why we don't have Wesley Huff Ministries International, with Wes blowing up on social media. And it does concern me. Yeah, it does concern me how quickly people want to latch on to other people.
Yes.
Right? Now, I'm glad there's a bunch of people following us now because of Wes, and I'm glad that people are following his content.
Absolutely.
But my prayer, listen, as you're listening to this, my prayer is that you are excited about Jesus.
Yes.
That ultimately, Apologetics Canada is pointing you to Jesus, that we are pointing you to Jesus, that Wes is pointing you to Jesus. Jesus is the point. We're not the point. And if you make the mistake of making us the point, then you're just setting yourself up for disappointment, because we aren't Jesus.
Yeah.
We will let you down.
Yeah.
At some point or other, we will let you down. Yeah.
In the words of the great Lauryn Hill, she says, "Just as Christ was a superstar, you stupid star, they'll hail you, then nail you, no matter who you are." It's feel free, like that's exactly it, right? You saw the cult of leadership even with Jesus. Like they're like, yes, okay. Some people believe, the Messiah is here, and and some had the expectation he was going to ride in on a white horse and just blow through Rome, and was slicing with a sword and all that kind of stuff. That's what they believed. He came in on a donkey, and then some are like, oh, okay, well, it's not quite what I thought, but yeah, I guess donkeys, maybe it's more of a mule. I don't know, right? They expected Jesus to do these things, and when he didn't deny his divinity in humbling himself, right? It's just like he didn't deny himself, and people didn't like that. They didn't like the way he went about it. And then this person who days earlier they were saying he's the Messiah, the coming king, they're nailing him on the cross, saying crucify him. And Jesus, and I think all leaders need to have an understanding of this, Jesus counted the cost early. If I'm truly called to lead these people, I have to actually lay my life down.
It's a call of humility. And let's just have a moment of real talk. Can we do that?
Yes, please.
Okay, let's have a little bit of real talk here. Leaders tend not to do that, right?
No.
And I remember, so all of you that are listening to this that have come over because of Wes, I just want you to hear me for a moment. I remember when Wes came on staff. I remember when Wes, you guys were part of these conversations. When we were filming Can I Trust the Bible? I was like, listen, Wes, most leaders will never do this for you. They're never going to platform you in this way. They're not going to put a bunch of money into making a video series about you.
Nope.
Why? Because they're not going to do that. They're going to make it all about them.
They're intimidated.
And I said, listen, Wes, I'm going to be your sidekick on this project? Can I trust the Bible? I'm going to be your sidekick, and my goal is to highlight the great work that you're doing, and my prayer is that God blesses you. And look what happened, man. God blessed him.
Yeah.
And God's blessing Apologetics Canada, and I think it's all wonderful. But people could look at it and be like, "Whoa, that's weird," right? Because all this attention isn't on the president of Apologetics Canada. It's on Wes. And listen, guys, you guys know me. I could care less.
Yep.
I'm like, because I'm about Jesus.
Yep.
And so for me, I'm like, that's fantastic. But I also love the fact that Wes is out there, and what is he doing? He's pointing people to Jesus, pointing people back to Apologetics Canada, because that's the ethos of who we are.
Exactly.
And so as you guys come and you're a part of Apologetics Canada, you just need to know that that's who we are.
That's who we are.
We're not your typical organization, and we desire that people come to know and love Jesus.
Yeah.
So that would be my one concern, though. Troy, you and I were talking the other day. We were having lunch the other day, and you're like, Andy, you wouldn't believe the comment that I saw on our socials the other day.
Yes, it was a comment that was I had to kind of put the fire out right away. It was a comment that said, "Hey, does anyone else find this kind of crazy of a coincidence that all of this stuff is happening to Wes at 33?" And I basically responded by saying,
alluding to Jesus.
Alluding to Jesus. And I responded saying, while the coincidence is crazy, I'm super thankful that we don't have to walk this metaphor any further. Because if you take it any further, bye, Wes, right? Like, there's a crucifixion. You know what I'm saying? And so I remember thinking the same. I'll be so honest. I remember someone saying something similar to me. They're like, "Ooh, Troy, you turned 30." And I was like, "Yeah." Like, huh? I'm like, wait, are you telling me I got 4 years of ministry and then it's up? No, like, let's not do this. I am not the Savior, the Christ, who has to. No, I've been called to spiritually lay my life down every single day because he did it, right? And we have to be so careful. Do not platform us. Do not put us on a pedestal. That is idolatry.
Yeah.
And look how God deals with
Preach.
idols. You see time and time again, Old Testament, what happens to these images that are erected, right? You don't do it. However, yes, I can have confidence and boldness in saying, yes, follow me as I follow Christ. Because in my following Christ, you're going to see me humble myself. You're going to see me get challenged by Scripture and those that I am following as they follow Christ. That is the only length in which you should be following me.
Yeah, and it's interesting to observe that this went both ways, right? Paul is saying, follow me as I follow Christ. But Jesus himself also set an example for us. And remember that story of Jesus in John chapter 13, where he is having his last dinner with his disciples before he knows he's going to get crucified, before he is going to be handed over to the authorities and he'll be killed. And what does he do? He washes the disciples' feet. And he was very specific about this. Do you understand what I've just done for you? After he washed everybody's feet, which, by the way, is one of the dirtiest jobs in the ancient world, right?
Present world, thank you.
It still is.
Present world, bro. What are we talking about?
Yeah. And there is a certain discomfort. Like, I mean, I've seen wedding ceremonies where, the bride and the groom, they wash each other's feet, and it's supposed to be a sign of
even that's uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah, exactly, right. And it's uncomfortable to watch. And here's Jesus doing this in that culture and setting where, hey, they didn't have the kind of sanitation system that we have today. There's all kinds of things out on the street, but here's Jesus washing the feet of his disciples. And after that, he said, do you understand what I've done for you? And he was very specific about this. I've done this for you so that you should do this for one another. You call me Lord and teacher, and you're right, because that is what I am. And now that your teacher and your Lord has done this for you, you should do that to one another. Yeah. Right? So it goes both ways.
Yeah, and what I see happening there is we're saying that there's a difference then between leadership and Christian leadership. Yeah, right? Leadership that is based on Jesus and leadership that's not based on Jesus.
Yeah.
I want to just circle back though, Troy, on something you were saying with regards to or asking about leadership and how much personality plays a part of it.
Hmm.
I do think personality plays a significant portion in leadership, but it's what kind of leadership are we talking about?
Hmm.
Because I don't think that we've all been called to the same level of leadership.
Yeah. I
There are
agree.
certain types of leadership that I am just not gifted at. I don't have the right personality for it.
Yeah.
And others do. This is something that I've always found fascinating whenever somebody becomes president in the United States. Oftentimes what they'll do, and I remember this very distinctly when Barack Obama became president, that they showed a before and after picture
Oh,
of the
man.
level of stress
Oh, man.
that person will experience, and it will age you. But you know what's interesting? Look at Trump. That job hasn't seemed to have affected him one bit.
Yeah.
And doesn't matter what you think about Obama or Trump. This isn't my point. My point is some people are just built different.
Yeah.
Some people can handle stress differently than other people. Like I have a friend who was just telling me about his dad who runs this huge organization, and they've got all sorts of stresses that they deal with. And I was asking him, I was like, man, how's your dad handling that? And he's like water off a duck's back, man. He was like, doesn't seem to affect my dad at all. He goes, it's bizarre. I'm like, well, it's just built different, man.
Yeah.
Like certain people can handle stress, different levels of stress better than others can.
Yeah.
And to me, I think that truly, guys, I think it's something to be celebrated. We're
is.
not all the same. We are different. We come with different skills, strengths, and abilities.
Yep.
And we need each other, man. And so that kind of gets me concerned sometimes, where I feel like our culture can at times have this appearance of like, oh, we should all be the same. We have this ideal of what an ideal leader is, and everybody should be pointing for that. And I'm like, oh, that's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
That is a terrible idea. Can you imagine at Apologetics Canada having two Andys?
Nobody would want to work here, trust me, guys.
We got a lot of work done.
Yeah, because I always have ideas. This is what they're talking about. Like I'm always going, hey, here's another idea, and it's like, okay, okay.
Can we just order the merch, Andes, please?
But one of the things that you brought up years ago, just as you are heading Apologetics Canada, one thing that you said that really stood out to me was this lesson that you learned, that you actually want to work with people who are different from you. Tell us a little bit more about that, Andy.
If we're all working with each other that have the same skills and abilities, we're in deep trouble. Mm-hmm. And by the way, let me just speak to you married people for a moment. The reality is that opposites tend to attract for a reason.
Oh, amen.
Because we need each other. And so those things in your spouse that drive you crazy could very well be the things that you actually need in your life.
Or 100% are the things you need in your life.
Like my wife is super organized. When we first
man.
got married, drove me crazy. Now I am so incredibly thankful for it because I don't now see it as a threat to me.
Yeah.
I see it now as a benefit.
Yeah.
And I'm quite happy to have her oversee our calendar and many other things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I find what I've just been kind of hearing here too is this thing that I would almost call like the mother goose complex, where there, as people know with ducks or chickens or whatever, poultry of, I was going to say poultry of all kinds. It's like when the baby bird is hatched, typically they will follow the first thing they see. And I think this is something that we see with culture, right? Sometimes it just so happens that a person is their first influence or exposure into said topic, or, take a high schooler who gets on, I'm going to go follow a streamer. The first person they see is oftentimes the person they latch onto for whatever reason. As I've been listening to us, and I think maybe this is the difference between Christian leadership and just generalized leadership, is the person who is the difference between someone who's actually nurturing, right? If a group of ducks see me, I can't nurture them. I can't do anything for them. But a mother goose who actually, sat on the eggs and watched them hatch, and they're going to be able to, hey, come to the water. This is what we do. This is what we eat. There's a big difference there between, I would say, Christian leadership and just generalized leadership, where it's not just a matter of, I was in your way and now you're going to follow me, right? Or I'm in your way and you're going to follow me till you can surpass me, right? There is a desire, I would say, even within Christian leadership, it's like, man, I actually want you to go and grow and be all that God has called you to be. And if I am just in this portion of your life to help see you through that gate, my work here is done. Because at the end of the day, I want to, when I stand before the Lord, hear, well done, my good and faithful servant, right? I don't know if I'm going to get to heaven and I'm going to see a lineup of people that I influenced, right? I don't know. I don't know if I'm ever going to see that. And quite honestly, I'm not overly concerned about it. I just want to be able to say that when I rest my head, if the Lord lets me have this experience, that I can rest my head and say, Lord, I did everything. I didn't do it perfect, but I did absolutely everything I could. And I want to go in peace. I want to go knowing that the job was done. And that's the kind of leader I want to be, regardless of the platform.
I love that, Troy. Maybe I'd say you could say it like this, Lord, I did everything I could with the skills and the talents you've given me, to point people to you. Yeah. I led with the gifts and talents you gave me. I was faithful. Yeah. And I completely agree. And that's going to put you in different places in your life. And faithfulness, I would say, then is going to look differently in different moments in your life. And if I could just speak into those future leaders for a moment, because there's some of you that you're in a place right now where you are under leadership that's not good. And listen, every one of us has been there. Yeah. And I remember, for me, the thing I kept telling myself and I kept talking and bringing before the Lord in those moments of poor leadership was not pointing my finger at that leader and saying, man, what a terrible leader, and trying to raise some sort of internal coup against that individual, right? The thing that I kept saying is, Lord, help me to be faithful in this space that you have me. But here was my biggest prayer. Lord, teach me. Yeah. Teach me through this experience so that one day when you have me in a different season of life and I am in a different level of leadership, that I will not make the same mistakes they are making now. Yeah. Help me to learn from them.
Yeah. And give me a perspective, Lord, that is not so judgmental as well, so that when I'm in that position and I realize, okay, this actually is really difficult. It's not just black and white all the time. I think that's an aspect of it too.
Because guys, you guys have seen that from me over the years. My time in leadership, one of the things that I had seen as a follower is leaders that, again, it's all about them. They don't want to platform people, or they don't want to, help spur people on to go further than themselves, right? I'd seen that so many times in my life. Yeah. And so, that was one thing that was just has been and continues to be an important part of Apologetics Canada. For many years of us doing the conference, Steve, I never would speak at the conference, right? Mm-hmm. And often I would platform other people like Steve and others. You'll see, if you go back and look at the earlier videos, you'll see Steve and others. You won't see me doing interviews and things like that, because I would give those opportunities to others. Mm-hmm. And then it was, after a while, people are like, hey, it's kind of weird that you're not.
We got comments, from people.
Yeah, going, maybe you should speak at that. And I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe that's a good idea, and I did, but and now I do. That's how important that aspect of leadership has always been to me. So, like Troy, we made a series together on identity, right? Where we did that together. Steve and I have, over the years we've done all sorts of stuff together.
Yeah, can I just share this one? This is one of my first memories of working with Apologetics Canada. This was even before I officially started working with Andy and Nancy. But I remember so clearly, listen, guys, when I first started getting into apologetics, one of the philosophers that I really admired and learned a lot from was William Lane Craig. Like many Christians who, got into apologetics, it was my gateway drug, if you will, was William Lane Craig, among others. And so imagine my surprise when this was when I was volunteering with Andy. Imagine my surprise when he said, "Hey, this year at this year's conference, we're going to have William Lane Craig." And then imagine my further surprise when Andy said, "Hey, you know what, Steve? Why don't you go up there with this other person that he was working with at the time, our good friend John Morrison? Why don't you and John go up there and do Q&A with Dr. Craig?" And just that opportunity. And I remember that was a very clear sort of a piece of memory in my mind, because this gave me a picture of the ethos of the kind of person that Andy is, but also the kind of organization this is, which made me all the more excited to work with Apologetics Canada. And it also gave me a sense of, you know what? It's okay to be a follower. In fact, it's a great thing to be a follower. It's not about who's taking charge, because I saw that from the leadership example of Andy. Sorry, I'm putting you on the pedestal here, but that was a very core memory.
Well, let me put somebody else on the pedestal, because you guys know I don't like to be there. It's funny you bring up Dr. Craig, though, because I love that guy, Dr. Craig. And in fact, I can never call him Bill. I respect him too much. But the time that I've gotten to spend with him, and even with his wife, I've always loved his humility. He has always led in humility and has done an incredible job. And so it's just interesting how there's people in our lives that impact us, right? That we see the way they've led. We've seen how they have been faithful to what the Lord's called them to. And there's at times that you're going to see bad examples. You're going to learn from that if you're willing. And there's other times you're going to see great examples, and you can learn from that, if you're willing. And it's just funny, because I would just say he's one of those people that I've really learned from.
Yeah. So then, just to quickly synthesize everything that I'm hearing you guys discuss, is that for one, and tell me if this makes sense. For one, I don't know that it's necessarily a good question to ask, whether am I a leader or am I a follower, right? I don't think there is it's not an either or thing, right?
Both and.
Both and in different contexts.
Yeah.
And secondly, I don't think it comes down to a matter of personality. It's not as though some people are cut out to be only a leader, other people are cut out to be only a follower. It's not about that. It's not a winner-loser kind of a thing dynamic here. Being a leader doesn't mean that you're a winner. Being a follower doesn't mean you're a loser, right? And there is a certain personality thing that goes into it, but that doesn't mean you're locked into one or the other. Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
Yeah. No, you are.
Is it a...
Yeah, no, I mean, mathematically, there's going to be more followers than leaders. It's just kind of the way it goes. I think the proper question is not, am I a leader or follower? The first question that the believer needs to ask is, who am I following?
Right.
Who am I following?
And where are they leading me?
Who am I following? Where are they leading me? And then the next thing I would say, especially with that follow me as I follow Christ point, I often will use this one for leaders. I'll say, would you follow you? If they're asking whether or not they should be a leader, I'll say, well, would you follow you? Would you allow someone to be a fly on the wall in your home and in your life? And many times I ask leaders that, and they're like, oh, well, I'm like, you should go down that road, right? Like that's really what is something that should challenge a person, because what it does to a person, and I'll kind of end with this, what it does to a person is it actually makes them take another step back, look a little deeper. And my prayer is that humility then settles in. It says, oh, I'm actually imperfect. Because if you're not willing to let someone see the way you are with your kids, the way you are with your spouse, the way you, even at home, like when I'm out, I'm like, oh, I'm a go-getter, and da-da-da-da, when people see me. But what am I doing at home? Am I just doing nothing? Am I spending time with Jesus? Do my kids see me ever open the word, right? As parents who are in ministry, your kids see you on the platform. They see you going out the door all the time, but do they ever see you going after God in the house? right? You're all kind and gentle to these people in your church, but you got no patience at home.
I think I've shared this before, but the thing that's always cracked me up about that, Troy, is that my kids have a difficult time like wrapping their mind around me and who I am, because they will see me. They have, it's really funny. My kids have like a high respect for me. They think they see me as this like leader character, but they're like, but Dad, you're such a normal dude.
Yeah.
They're like, but you like crack jokes and you laugh and you don't take things very seriously. Like, you know, you don't, it's one of actually one of the models here at Apologetics Canada is
Yep.
we don't take ourselves too seriously, and we
Right.
know how to laugh.
Yeah.
And it's just hilarious because my boys are just not sure what to do with that. They're like, and so sometimes they'll be like, man, they're like, I don't know if people would, they're like, I think people would be surprised what you're like at home. I'm like, what, that I'm normal?
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
the Andy you see on the stage is the same Andy you get at home. But
Yeah.
hey, I want to say something though here that we talk about at Apologetics Canada as thought leaders.
Yes.
And I want, and it's something I actually spent some time just praying about what is a thought leader, and particularly within Christianity, as we want to create leaders, and I would say as we want to create thought leaders, what does that look like? And so here's the definition that I kind of put down, and I'd encourage people just to give some thought to this. That I would say a Christian thought leader is defined as a man or woman with a deep knowledge of and courageous commitment to the gospel.
Yeah.
And that leads to a genuine love for God and people as they serve their church.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, to me, wouldn't you say that kind of, when you start thinking like that, then you're like, oh, okay, this actually applies to everybody. It's just going to look different in your context.
Yeah. Well, that's all we got for you guys today. Thank you again for tuning into the AC podcast. Watch this quick video for next steps. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us for another episode of the AC podcast. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button so that you never miss out on an episode and we can beat the algorithm. We want to get the message of the gospel out through apologetics conversations just like the one we had. For more information or to check out other resources, you can obviously head to apologeticscanada.com. And if you ever want to meet us in person or if we have an online event, head to the events tab on the website. But you know the drill, you know the motto. Until next time, love God, love people. Bye for now.
It's the